The South Pole sits at the bottom of the world, marking the southernmost point on Earth where the planet's axis meets its surface. Unlike the North Pole, which rests on floating sea ice, the South Pole is located on land, atop the vast ice sheet that covers the continent of Antarctica. This ice sheet is thousands of feet thick, an accumulation of snow that has fallen and compressed over hundreds of thousands of years. Beneath this immense layer of ice lies solid rock, the actual continent hidden under a frozen blanket that never melts. The elevation at the South Pole is significant, over 9,000 feet above sea level. This high altitude is due entirely to the thickness of the ice sheet, as the land beneath is much lower. The elevation affects the air pressure and the way the cold feels, making the environment even more austere than it would be at sea level. The thin air carries less oxygen, and the combination of altitude and cold creates conditions that are uniquely challenging, though in a quiet, persistent way rather than a dramatic one. The ice sheet extends in all directions from the South Pole, a vast white expanse that covers an area larger than Europe. The surface is relatively flat near the pole, without the pressure ridges and leads that characterize Arctic sea ice. Instead, the Antarctic ice sheet presents a smooth, gently undulating surface that stretches to the horizon. The smoothness comes from the way snow falls and accumulates, settling in even layers that are gradually compressed into solid ice over time. Snow falls gently at the South Pole throughout the year, though the total amount of precipitation is very small. Antarctica is technically a desert, receiving less moisture than many of the world's hot, sandy deserts. The snow that does fall is fine and dry, like powder, settling on the surface in thin layers. This snow rarely melts, instead remaining where it falls and slowly compacting under its own weight. Over centuries, the accumulated snow transforms into glacial ice, adding to the thickness of the ice sheet. The temperature at the South Pole is extremely cold, remaining below freezing all year. During the Antarctic winter, temperatures can drop to depths that make the environment one of the coldest places on Earth. Even during summer, when the sun is continuously present, the temperature rarely rises much above -20 or 30 degrees. The cold is dry and steady, a constant presence that defines every aspect of the environment. The lack of moisture in the air makes the cold feel different than it might in more humid climates, sharp and clear rather than damp and penetrating. The Antarctic winter brings a period of continuous darkness that lasts for months. During this time, the sun does not rise above the horizon, and the South Pole exists in a state of perpetual night. The darkness is not complete, as stars provide some illumination, and during certain times the moon is visible, casting a pale light across the ice. The darkness has a depth to it, a quality that seems to settle over the landscape and create a profound sense of stillness. The stars are exceptionally clear at the South Pole, visible in great numbers during the polar night. The dry air and lack of light pollution make the sky appear deep and black, with stars standing out in sharp relief. The Milky Way is visible as a band of light stretching across the sky, and individual stars seem to shine with unusual brightness. The southern sky contains different constellations than those visible from northern latitudes, with the Southern Cross being one of the most recognizable patterns. During the Antarctic summer, the sun remains above the horizon continuously, circling the sky in a slow loop. The sun stays relatively low, never climbing to the overhead position it reaches at lower latitudes. This creates a quality of light that is soft and diffuse, spreading evenly across the ice without creating strong shadows. The continuous daylight can make it difficult to sense the passage of time, as there is no sunset or sunrise to mark the rhythm of days. Time becomes measured by clocks rather than by natural cycles of light. The ice beneath the South Pole is moving, though this movement is extremely slow. The ice sheet flows outward from the center of Antarctica toward the coast, driven by the accumulation of snow at the high interior and the force of gravity. This flow is measured in feet per year, imperceptible on a human timescale but significant over decades and centuries. The movement means that the physical ice you might stand on at the South Pole today will eventually make its way toward the coast, though this journey will take thousands of years. The surface of the ice at the South Pole can develop a texture from the wind. Sastrugi are wave-like ridges carved into the snow by persistent winds, creating patterns that align with the prevailing wind direction. These features are hard and sculpted, ranging from a few inches to several feet in height. Walking across sastrugi requires careful attention, as the surface is uneven and the hardened snow can be sharp. The patterns created by sastrugi add texture to the otherwise smooth ice sheet, evidence of the wind's patient work. The wind at the South Pole is often present, though it is generally not as strong as in some other parts of Antarctica. The wind moves across the ice in steady currents, carrying snow crystals that glitter in the light. When the wind picks up, it creates a condition where blowing snow reduces visibility, making the landscape appear hazy and indistinct. The wind has a sound, a soft rushing or whistling that provides a gentle background to the otherwise silent environment. The horizon at the South Pole is distant and featureless, a line where white ice meets blue or gray sky. There are no mountains visible from the pole, no landmarks to provide points of reference. The flatness creates an optical effect where distances become difficult to judge, as there is nothing to compare or measure against. Objects can appear closer or farther than they actually are, and the uniform whiteness of the surface can make it hard to see variations in terrain. The South Pole exists in a state of extreme isolation. It is one of the most remote places on Earth, far from any coast and far from the rest of humanity. The nearest ocean is hundreds of miles away, beyond the edge of the ice sheet. This remoteness creates a sense of being at the end of the world, in a place that exists apart from the usual flow of human activity and natural diversity. The isolation is not lonely but rather peaceful, a quality of solitude that feels appropriate to the landscape. The ice sheet at the South Pole is part of the larger Antarctic ice sheet, which contains the majority of the world's fresh water in frozen form. This ice has accumulated over millennia, with the oldest ice near the bottom of the sheet being hundreds of thousands of years old. Ice cores drilled from the Antarctic ice sheet provide a record of past climates, with each layer of ice containing information about the atmosphere at the time the snow fell. These cores are like archives, preserving a history of the Earth's climate in frozen form. The air at the South Pole is very dry, with extremely low humidity. This dryness affects how the cold feels and how the body responds to the environment. The dry air can make breathing feel different, and it affects the skin and eyes. The lack of moisture also means that there is very little cloud formation, resulting in skies that are often clear. The clarity of the air contributes to the exceptional visibility and the brightness of the stars at night. The concept of time zones at the South Pole is arbitrary, as all lines of longitude converge at this point. Research stations in Antarctica typically use the time zone of their home country or a time zone that is convenient for their operations. At the geographic South Pole itself, any time zone could theoretically be used, as the pole exists at the meeting point of all time zones. This creates an interesting situation where time is a matter of convention rather than geographical necessity. The South Pole is marked by a ceremonial pole and a sign, though these markers are placed on the ice sheet rather than on the actual ground beneath. Because the ice is slowly moving, these markers gradually drift away from the true geographic pole and must be repositioned periodically. The geographic South Pole is determined by precise measurements using GPS and astronomical observations, pinpointing the exact location where the Earth's axis of rotation intersects the surface. The silence at the South Pole is profound and all-encompassing. With no trees, no flowing water, and very little wind much of the time, there are few natural sounds to break the quiet. The ice occasionally makes sounds as it settles or shifts, low creaks or groans that carry across the surface. These sounds are infrequent and soft, adding to the stillness rather than disturbing it. The silence is one of the most striking features of the environment, creating an auditory space that feels vast and empty. The snow at the South Pole has a quality that makes it squeak when walked upon in very cold temperatures. This squeaking is caused by the compression of the ice crystals under pressure, creating a high-pitched sound with each step. The squeak is distinctive and occurs only when the temperature is particularly low and the snow is dry. It is a small detail but one that adds a sensory element to the experience of moving across the frozen surface. The sky at the South Pole can display unusual optical phenomena due to the ice crystals suspended in the air. Halos around the sun or moon are common, created when light passes through these crystals and is refracted. Sundogs, bright spots that appear on either side of the sun, are another phenomenon that occurs regularly. These optical effects are subtle and beautiful, adding interest to the sky without being dramatic or overwhelming. They are a natural consequence of the cold and the ice crystals that float in the air. The South Pole sits on the polar plateau, the high interior region of Antarctica where the ice sheet is thickest and the conditions are most severe. The plateau is vast and featureless, extending for hundreds of miles in all directions. The uniformity of the landscape can be disorienting, as there are no natural features to provide orientation or a sense of place. The plateau exists in a state of quiet constancy, changing little from day to day or season to season. During the transition periods between polar night and polar day, the South Pole experiences twilight that lasts for weeks. The sun gradually approaches the horizon from below, creating a long period of dim light before it finally rises and begins its circular path around the sky. Similarly, at the end of summer, the sun gradually lowers until it dips below the horizon and the winter darkness begins. These transition periods are gentle, unfolding slowly without the abrupt changes of sunrise and sunset that occur at lower latitudes. The ice at the South Pole is extremely cold throughout its entire depth. Even in summer, when the surface is warmed slightly by the sun, the temperature within the ice remains well below freezing. This cold ice has properties that are different from warmer ice, being harder and more brittle. The deep cold affects everything, from the way equipment functions to the behavior of materials. Metal becomes brittle, plastics crack, and liquids freeze solid. The barometric pressure at the South Pole is lower than it would be at sea level due to the high elevation. This lower pressure means that water boils at a lower temperature and that the air contains less oxygen per breath. The body must adapt to these conditions, working harder to extract the oxygen it needs from the thin air. The combination of low pressure, extreme cold, and dry air creates an environment that requires significant physiological adjustment. The South Pole is a place where the usual reference points for direction become meaningless. Since it is the southernmost point on Earth, every direction from the South Pole is north. The concepts of east and west lose their traditional meaning, as they are defined by lines of longitude that all meet at the pole. Navigation requires different methods, using the position of the sun or stars rather than compass directions, as compasses become unreliable near the magnetic pole. The magnetic South Pole is located in a different place than the geographic South Pole, and it moves over time. The geographic South Pole is fixed, determined by the Earth's axis of rotation, while the magnetic pole wanders due to changes in the Earth's magnetic field. This distinction is important for navigation and scientific measurements. At the geographic South Pole, compass needles behave erratically, as the magnetic field lines point nearly straight up or down rather than horizontally. The Antarctic continent beneath the ice sheet is largely unknown in detail. Scientists have used radar and seismic measurements to map the topography under the ice, revealing mountains, valleys, and even lakes. Some of these subglacial lakes are large and contain liquid water that has been isolated from the surface for millions of years. The hidden landscape beneath the ice adds an element of mystery to Antarctica, a reminder that much of this continent remains unexplored and unknown. The ice at the South Pole reflects most of the sunlight that falls on it, giving the surface a brilliant white appearance during the polar day. This high reflectivity helps to keep the ice cold, as very little solar energy is absorbed. The brightness can be intense, requiring eye protection to prevent snow blindness. The reflected light creates a luminous quality to the landscape, with the ice appearing to glow from within when the sun is at certain angles. The katabatic winds that flow down from the high interior of Antarctica toward the coast do not affect the South Pole as much as they do the coastal regions. These winds are created by cold, dense air sliding down the sloped ice sheet under the force of gravity. At the South Pole, which sits near the center of the continent at the highest point of the ice sheet, the winds are generally calmer. The air is still and quiet much of the time, contributing to the sense of stillness that pervades the environment. The frost that forms on surfaces at the South Pole creates delicate crystal structures. These frost crystals grow in intricate patterns, feather-like formations that catch the light and create subtle sparkles. The frost forms when water vapor in the air comes into contact with cold surfaces and freezes directly, bypassing the liquid phase. The crystals are fragile and temporary, disappearing when brushed or when conditions change, but they add a delicate beauty to the harsh environment. The South Pole is part of a continent that has no native human population. Antarctica has never been permanently inhabited by indigenous peoples, and even today the only humans present are scientists and support staff at research stations. This lack of human history gives Antarctica a different character than other continents, a place that has existed without human influence for all but the most recent moments of geological time. The continent belongs to itself, shaped only by natural forces. The snow that falls at the South Pole is often so fine that it seems more like a mist than precipitation. The tiny crystals drift slowly downward, catching the light and creating a subtle shimmer in the air. This snow accumulates very slowly, building up in thin layers over months and years. Each snowflake that falls becomes part of the ice sheet, eventually being compressed and transformed into solid ice as more snow falls on top of it. The curvature of the Earth is slightly more apparent at the poles due to the flattening of the planet at these points. The Earth is not a perfect sphere but an oblate spheroid, slightly flattened at the poles and bulging at the equator. This flattening is subtle, but it means that the horizon at the South Pole is very slightly closer than it would be at the equator. The effect is not noticeable to the eye, but it is part of the unique geometry of this location. The air at the South Pole is among the cleanest on Earth, with very little pollution or particulate matter. The remoteness of the continent and the patterns of atmospheric circulation mean that air masses reaching the South Pole have traveled great distances over the ocean, being cleansed of most contaminants along the way. This clean air is valuable for scientific research, allowing precise measurements of atmospheric composition without the interference of local pollution. The purity of the air contributes to the clarity of the sky and the brilliance of the stars. The South Pole experiences temperature inversions, where the air near the surface is colder than the air above it. This occurs because the ice surface radiates heat away into space, cooling the air in contact with it. The warmer air above acts as a blanket, trapping the cold air near the surface. These inversions are most pronounced during the polar night when there is no solar heating to mix the air. The layered structure of the atmosphere affects how sound travels and how weather develops. The ice at the South Pole contains bubbles of ancient air trapped when the snow was compressed into ice. These bubbles are tiny time capsules, preserving samples of the atmosphere from thousands of years ago. Scientists can extract and analyze these air bubbles to learn about past concentrations of gases like carbon dioxide and methane. The bubbles are distributed throughout the ice in layers, each layer corresponding to a different time period in the Earth's history. The South Pole sits on a continent that is surrounded by ocean, though this ocean is hundreds of miles away. The Southern Ocean encircles Antarctica, driven by strong westerly winds that create the Antarctic circumpolar current. This current flows continuously around the continent, the only ocean current that circles the globe uninterrupted by land. The isolation of Antarctica is maintained in part by this circumpolar current, which acts as a barrier separating the cold polar waters from the warmer waters to the north. The glacial ice that makes up the ice sheet at the South Pole has a slight blue tint when seen in thick sections or in crevasses. This blue color comes from the way ice absorbs light, preferentially absorbing the red wavelengths and transmitting the blue. The blue is subtle and becomes more apparent the thicker the ice is. At the surface, where the ice is covered with snow, the color is white, but deeper ice reveals this delicate blue hue. The South Pole is a place where the scale of time feels different. The ice sheet has been here for millions of years, accumulating slowly and steadily. The processes that shape the landscape occur over timescales that are difficult to comprehend, measured in centuries and millennia rather than days and years. This deep time is part of the character of Antarctica, a reminder that the Earth operates on scales far longer than human lifetimes. The absence of life at the South Pole is nearly complete. There are no plants, no animals, no visible organisms of any kind. The extreme cold and dryness make it impossible for most forms of life to survive. Even microorganisms are rare, though some bacteria and other microscopic life can exist in the ice and snow, lying dormant and waiting for more favorable conditions. The lack of life creates an environment that feels elemental and pure, reduced to its basic components of ice, air, and rock. The Antarctic Treaty, signed by many nations, designates Antarctica as a scientific preserve and prohibits military activity and mineral mining. The treaty ensures that the continent remains a place of international cooperation and scientific research. The South Pole, as part of Antarctica, is protected under this treaty, maintaining its character as a natural environment free from exploitation. This legal protection adds to the sense of Antarctica being a place set apart, valued for its scientific importance and its pristine condition. The geometric South Pole, determined by the Earth's axis of rotation, is distinct from other concepts of the pole. There is the ceremonial pole, marked by a physical sign and flag. There is the magnetic South Pole, where compass needles point vertically. There is also the South Geomagnetic Pole, calculated from models of the Earth's magnetic field. Each of these poles represents a different way of defining the southernmost point, and they are located in slightly different places. The geometric South Pole is the one that remains fixed, the true bottom of the Earth's axis. The snow surface at the South Pole can develop a crust from the action of wind and slight surface warming during summer. This crust is hard enough to support weight in many places, though it can also break through unexpectedly. The crust creates a layer of harder snow on top of softer snow beneath, adding structure to the surface. Walking on crusted snow produces a different sensation than walking on soft powder, with each step either holding firm or breaking through depending on the thickness and strength of the crust. The South Pole is a place where the extremes of nature are present in a quiet, undramatic way. The cold is extreme, but it is steady. The isolation is complete, but it is peaceful. The landscape is harsh, but it is also simple and beautiful in its starkness. These qualities create an environment that is remarkable not for its violence or drama but for its purity and its reduction to essential elements. The South Pole is a place where nature exists in its most fundamental form. The accumulation of snow at the South Pole is so slow that the surface rises only a few inches each year. This slow accumulation is part of the process that builds and maintains the ice sheet. Each year's snowfall is added to the layers beneath, gradually compacting and transforming into ice. The process is continuous and patient, unfolding over timescales that make human life seem brief and fleeting. The ice sheet is the result of this accumulation over hundreds of thousands of years, a monument to the persistence of geological processes. The South Pole experiences no rain, only snow. The temperature never rises above freezing, so precipitation always falls in solid form. This means that the only source of new ice is snowfall, and the ice sheet grows only through this slow accumulation. The absence of liquid water at the surface creates an environment that is entirely frozen, where water exists only in its solid state. This permanence of ice is one of the defining features of the polar environment. The light during the Antarctic summer has a quality that is unique to polar regions. The sun, circling low in the sky, creates long angles of light that give the landscape a soft, even illumination. Shadows are subtle and stretched, extending across the ice in pale lines. The light does not have the harshness of midday sun at lower latitudes but rather a gentle, diffuse quality that seems to suit the quiet landscape. The continuous nature of this light, never fading into darkness, creates a timeless feeling where one moment blends seamlessly into the next. The South Pole is one of the coldest places on Earth, but it is not the coldest. The lowest temperatures recorded on Antarctica have occurred at other locations on the high plateau, in areas where cold air pools in slight depressions. However, the South Pole is consistently extremely cold, with temperatures that remain well below freezing throughout the year. The cold is a defining feature of the environment, shaping everything from the properties of the ice to the behavior of the atmosphere. The vastness of Antarctica is difficult to comprehend. The ice sheet that contains the South Pole covers an area larger than the United States and Mexico combined. The ice is on average over a mile thick, containing enough frozen water to raise global sea levels significantly if it were to melt. This immense volume of ice represents a significant portion of the Earth's fresh water, locked in frozen form for the past several million years. The scale of the ice sheet makes the South Pole feel like just one point in an enormous frozen landscape that extends beyond sight in all directions. The South Pole is a place where human presence is minimal and temporary. Research stations are present, but they are small and isolated, islands of human activity in a vast natural environment. The people who work at these stations are visitors, staying for a season or a year before returning to more temperate regions. The continent itself remains indifferent to human presence, continuing its slow processes of snow accumulation and ice flow regardless of whether anyone is there to observe. The clarity of the ice at the South Pole allows scientists to drill cores that provide a continuous record of past climates. These cores can be several miles long, reaching ice that fell as snow hundreds of thousands of years ago. Each layer in the core represents a year or a season, and the chemical composition of the ice reveals information about temperature, precipitation, and atmospheric gases at the time it formed. The ice cores are a library of climate history, written in frozen water and waiting to be read. The South Pole is located on the Antarctic Plateau, a region that is among the highest and flattest areas on the continent. The plateau is a result of the thick accumulation of ice, which has built up over time to create a gently domed surface. The plateau extends for vast distances, creating a landscape that is remarkably uniform and featureless. This flatness contributes to the sense of the South Pole being a place without boundaries or limits, where the horizon stretches away in all directions without interruption. The wind patterns at the South Pole are influenced by the high-pressure system that sits over the Antarctic interior. This high pressure creates a circulation pattern where air descends and flows outward toward the coast. At the South Pole itself, which is near the center of this system, the winds are generally light. The air is cold and dense, settling slowly and creating stable atmospheric conditions. The stability contributes to the clarity of the air and the constancy of the cold. The South Pole is a place where the passage of seasons is marked primarily by light rather than temperature. Winter and summer have different temperatures, but both are extremely cold by any normal standard. The real difference between seasons is the presence or absence of the sun. Summer brings continuous daylight and slightly warmer temperatures, while winter brings continuous darkness and the coldest conditions. The transition between these seasons is gradual, with the sun slowly rising or setting over a period of weeks. The ice sheet at the South Pole is thick enough that the weight of the ice compresses the layers beneath. This compression transforms snow into fin, a transitional state between snow and ice, and eventually into solid glacial ice. The process takes many years, with the snow gradually becoming denser and the individual ice crystals growing larger. Deep within the ice sheet, the pressure is so great that the ice behaves almost like a plastic, flowing slowly under its own weight. The South Pole sits at an elevation where the atmospheric pressure is significantly reduced compared to sea level. This reduced pressure affects many things, from the boiling point of water to the efficiency of combustion. The thin air carries less oxygen, making physical exertion more difficult and requiring the body to work harder to extract the oxygen it needs. The combination of high elevation and extreme cold creates a challenging environment, though one that is managed through preparation and gradual acclimatization. The horizon at the South Pole appears to curve very slightly, a result of the Earth's curvature and the flatness of the ice sheet. On a clear day, when visibility is good, the horizon is sharp and distinct, a clean line separating white ice from blue sky. The uniformity of this view in all directions reinforces the sense of being at a special point on the Earth, a place where the normal rules of geography are altered by the planet's geometry. The South Pole is a place where the natural world is reduced to its simplest elements. There is ice, there is air, there is light and darkness, and there is cold. These elements interact in predictable ways, governed by the laws of physics and thermodynamics. The simplicity creates an environment that is easy to understand in principle but difficult to experience in person. The starkness of the landscape mirrors the starkness of the conditions, creating a unity between appearance and reality. The snow that accumulates at the South Pole preserves a record not just of climate but of other events as well. Volcanic eruptions, for example, leave layers of ash in the ice that can be identified and dated. These ash layers serve as markers, helping scientists correlate ice cores from different locations and establish precise timelines. The ice is a recorder of Earth's history, capturing not just atmospheric conditions but also major geological events. The South Pole is a destination that has captured human imagination for over a century. Early explorers like Amundsen and Scott raced to be the first to reach it, enduring tremendous hardships in the process. Today, the pole is more accessible, but it remains a symbol of human achievement and the desire to explore remote places. The history of polar exploration adds a layer of human story to the natural landscape, though the ice itself remains unchanged by these narratives. The isolation of the South Pole creates a unique psychological environment. Those who spend time there experience a kind of solitude that is rare in the modern world. The absence of distractions, the uniformity of the landscape, and the extreme conditions all contribute to a sense of being removed from normal life. This isolation can be challenging, but it can also create space for reflection and contemplation. The quietness of the environment encourages an internal quietness, a settling of the mind that mirrors the stillness of the ice. The South Pole is a place where the boundaries between earth and sky seem particularly clear. The ice extends flat to the horizon, and above it the sky stretches in an unbroken dome. There is nothing between, no trees or hills or clouds to interrupt the clean division between surface and atmosphere. This clarity of separation emphasizes the vastness of both the ice and the sky, making each seem larger and more present. The ice continues to accumulate, layer upon layer, season after season, year after year. The South Pole sits on top of this ancient accumulation, a point that marks the bottom of the world's axis. The ice is patient and persistent, recording the history of the Earth's climate while slowly flowing outward toward distant coasts. The South Pole remains, a fixed point in a moving landscape, a place of cold and quiet where the natural world exists in its most elemental and undisturbed form. The ice stretches away in all directions, white and still, holding within it the memory of countless years and the promise of countless more to come.